The architecture of American unipolarity did not collapse in a direct superpower confrontation. It was just mathematically dismantled in a 30-meter-deep maritime choke point. Let us discard the conventional media narratives. Within the last 24 hours, the global deterrence grid fundamentally fractured. The Israel Defense Forces transmitted an unprecedented request for a cessation of hostilities under duress, algorithmically overwhelmed by a synchronized multi-axis saturation of 450 Iranian ballistic missiles and 2,500 precision rockets. Simultaneously, the United States Navy's most sophisticated subsurface assets have been geographically locked out of the Strait of Hormuz, completely neutralized by 16 undetected coastal submarines and a networked array of intelligent naval mines. This is not a sudden regional crisis. This is a meticulously engineered systemic exhaustion trap. While Washington drains its finite interceptor stockpiles and faces a catastrophic domestic oil shock, Beijing and Moscow are actively leveraging this exact military paralysis to dismantle the global petrodollar system. The era of American geopolitical supremacy is over, and it was defeated by sheer asymmetric mathematics. Here is the structural, operational analysis of exactly how the unipolar world order was just permanently erased. To truly comprehend the strategic entrapment of the United States military, an analyst must first examine the uncompromising mathematical constraints of the operational theater. The geography of the Strait of Hormuz is the foundational matrix that renders the American Navy's most sophisticated capabilities functionally irrelevant, While the strait is 54 kilometers wide at its narrowest point, the actual navigable shipping channels required for commercial and military transit are merely 3 kilometers wide. The average water depth along these critical maritime arteries is approximately 30 meters. When juxtaposed against the primary subsurface assets of the United States, the geographic incompatibility is absolute. American Ohio-class submarines, the apex of Western undersea projection, are 170 meters long and displace 18,000 tons of water. From an operational standpoint, you cannot physically fit an Ohio-class submarine in water that is 30 meters deep. You cannot maneuver it in a channel restricted to 3 kilometers in width. Consequently, the American Navy's most powerful undersea platforms, explicitly designed to hunt and neutralize adversary submarines, cannot even enter the operational environment where the primary threat resides. The American submarine fleet is undeniably powerful in open ocean warfare, but in the shallow, narrow, noise-saturated waters of the Strait of Hormuz, it cannot operate at all. Operating undetected within this American geographic blind spot is an asymmetric naval asset meticulously designed for this exact environment. Iran has deployed 16 Ghadir-class submarines, vessels that measure a mere 29 meters in length and operate with a displacement of only 150 tons. These coastal submarines are small enough to effortlessly navigate the shallow channels that completely preclude American subsurface operations. More critically, their acoustic signature is functionally negated by the operational environment. When a Ghadir-class submarine settles onto the seabed and shuts down its engines, it becomes acoustically indistinguishable from the surrounding environment. Its acoustic electric propulsion system produces minimal noise, which is easily masked by the constant ambient noise generated by dozens of commercial vessels transiting the strait above them. Within 30 meters of water, the most sophisticated sonar systems on Earth cannot reliably separate a stationary submarine from the background noise of a busy commercial waterway. This absolute stealth capability is explicitly paired with a highly sophisticated area denial payload. Each Ghadir submarine is capable of carrying between 4 and 8 naval mines per mission. Iran's arsenal has evolved far beyond traditional contact explosives. It currently includes magnetic mines triggered by the metallic signature of a passing hull, acoustic mines triggered by the sound profile of specific vessel types, and pressure mines triggered by the hydrodynamic displacement of a passing ship. Most alarmingly, this includes intelligent mines like the Maham 3 and Maham 7 variants that can be programmed to distinguish between military vessels and commercial tankers, selectively detonating against warships while allowing civilian shipping to pass. The Pentagon has officially confirmed the deployment of at least 12 of these mines in the strait, their exact locations, triggering mechanisms, and specific targeting profiles remaining entirely undisclosed. 12 mines is not enough to physically block all transit, but it is mathematically more than enough to stop it entirely. No ship's captain will risk a fully loaded oil tanker on a route where even one mine might be waiting. The insurance cost alone makes the transit economically non-viable, while the profound uncertainty is itself a weapon that operates regardless of whether any mine ever detonates. The American counter-operation, designated Operation Mysterious Fury, serves as a prime historical case study in the failure of conventional military metrics. Washington publicly announced the destruction of 11 Iranian submarines, attempting to project a narrative that the undersea threat had been substantially degraded. An objective analysis of the target list, however, reveals a profound strategic failure. The destroyed assets included the 600-ton Fateh class and 3 Russian-manufactured Kilo-class submarines. These were Iran's largest, deepest diving, and noisiest platforms, operating in water where American sonar actually functions. The 29-meter Ghadir-class submarines, the actual asymmetric threat resting on the shallow seabed, were not destroyed, and all evidence suggests they were not even found. You cannot destroy what you cannot detect. This glaring operational vulnerability is precisely why America's European allies, Germany, France, the United Kingdom, Italy, and Spain, have all categorically declined to participate in any naval operation aimed at reopening the Strait of Hormuz. The German defense minister stated publicly that Europe will not send its frigates into the strait to do what the powerful American Navy apparently cannot do for itself. European military planners executed a rational risk assessment, determining that deploying specialized mine-sweeping naval assets into a confined waterway where Iranian mines, submarines, shore-launched missiles, and drone attacks can converge simultaneously is a mission whose risk profile exceeds any realistic political benefit. If the world's most powerful navy cannot clear the mines, the task is simply unachievable at an acceptable risk. To fully comprehend the total collapse of Western deterrence, we must pivot from the maritime depths to the aerospace mathematics that brought the state of Israel to its knees. The Israel Defense Forces surrendered last night, transmitting a request for an immediate cessation of hostilities through emergency back channels. This unprecedented capitulation was driven entirely by the arithmetic conclusion that continued organized resistance was no longer operationally viable across multiple simultaneous theaters. The instrument of this defeat was the mathematics of 450 Shahab-3 ballistic missiles launched from Iranian territory in synchronized salvos, coupled with 2,500 rockets and precision munitions fired simultaneously from Lebanese soil by Hezbollah forces. The fundamental operational challenge of a coordinated multi-front strike is synchronization, a capability the Western defense consensus had falsely assessed as beyond Iranian and Hezbollah capacity. The operation began its final activation sequence 72 hours before the first missile launched, the culmination of years of tabletop exercises, mobile launcher pre-positioning, and secure communications infrastructure development. On the Iranian side, 450 Shahab-3 medium-range ballistic missiles had been pre-positioned on mobile transporter erector launchers distributed across multiple provinces, deliberately ensuring that no single Israeli or American strike package could neutralize the launchers simultaneously. The modern Shahab-3 incorporates a separating re-entry vehicle fitted with maneuvering capability, drastically complicating intercept geometry during the terminal phase. Crucially, Iran did not fire these missiles sequentially. They fired them in coordinated salvos of 15 to 20 missiles targeted against specific Israeli military installations, arriving from multiple approach vectors within highly compressed 90-second windows. The mathematics of intercept capacity dictate that an Arrow 3 battery, constrained by its radar refresh rate and reload cycle, simply cannot engage 20 warheads arriving simultaneously within a 45-second window. Iran precisely calculated the leakage rate for every battery in Israel's coverage architecture and designed its salvo sizes to mathematically guarantee that warheads would reach critical targets regardless of the defense's performance. Simultaneously, Hezbollah activated its full northern strike capability, firing 2,500 rockets, ranging from short-range Katyushas to precision-guided Fateh 110 missiles. Operationally, this massive barrage forced Israel to fatally split its intercept capacity between the southern and eastern threat axis generated by Iran and the northern threat axis generated by Lebanon. Resources committed to intercepting Lebanese rockets are resources completely unavailable to intercept Iranian ballistic missiles. This created a resource allocation problem that Israel's defense architecture was mathematically never designed to solve. Furthermore, this assault was engineered as an asymmetric economic exhaustion trap. Short-range Katyusha rockets, costing Hezbollah approximately $300 to produce, served primarily as interceptor consumers. Every Katyusha that Iron Dome engages costs Israel a Tamir interceptor worth $50,000. The economic exchange ratio of this engagement represents a financial hemorrhage that no defense budget can sustain indefinitely. While the Iron Dome was consumed tracking cheap rocket artillery, Hezbollah deployed its precision-guided Fateh 110 missiles specifically against the Iron Dome battery positions themselves. Targeting active defense batteries with precision missiles they cannot intercept because they are fully committed to processing the broader barrage as a tactical concept of extraordinary elegance, the defense system is destroyed by the very act of defending. The diversity of the Iranian payloads completely paralyzed the Israeli intercept algorithms. Conventional high-explosive warheads were targeted against hardened military infrastructure and command nodes. Cluster munition warheads, comprising approximately 50% of Iran's ballistic deployments, were targeted against airfield surfaces like Nevatim and Ramon. A cluster warhead does not destroy a runway in a single impact. After it opens, one missile becomes 80 separate descending targets across a 10-kilometer dispersal radius. No defense system currently deployed anywhere on Earth possesses the simultaneous tracking and engagement capacity to address that overwhelming volume. Additionally, Iran deployed electronic warfare warheads designed to generate electromagnetic pulse effects, successfully degrading radar installations and early warning pictures at the exact moment maximum radar clarity was required. By the 11th minute of the engagement, leakage began reaching Tel Aviv. Arrow 3 batteries had exhausted approximately 70% of their interceptor inventory, and Iron Dome batteries in the Tel Aviv metropolitan area had consumed their ready stocks, falling into reload cycles that left lethal coverage gaps of 4 to 8 minutes. The IDF Air Force was highly degraded by strikes against its air bases, leaving insufficient serviceable aircraft to generate counter-battery sorties. Ground forces on the northern border were taking unsustainable casualties fighting Hezbollah's elite Radwan force, which had crossed into Israeli territory under the cover of the rocket barrage. Confronted with depleted air defenses, a degraded air force, and a continuing ballistic missile threat showing no signs of exhaustion, Israeli leadership faced a decision with no favorable branch. They rationally requested a cessation of hostilities under duress to preserve whatever military capacity remained. The domestic political reckoning was instantaneous. The governing coalition collapsed within hours, and emergency sessions of the Knesset were called under conditions of physical danger. The deterrence architecture that Israel painstakingly built over 75 years was fundamentally disrupted in a single night. When Washington received this catastrophic news at 3:42 in the morning, the Situation Room quickly realized the standard toolkit of American strategic response was entirely obsolete. Deploying American naval aviation into the theater runs directly into the devastating reality of Iran's anti-ship missile capability. The USS Abraham Lincoln and USS Theodore Roosevelt carrier strike groups are currently forced to operate at extreme standoff distances because American Naval Command has explicitly assessed that the risk of operating closer to Iranian launch ranges is unacceptable. Moving those carriers back into strike range means accepting a risk level that commanders absolutely refuse to take because they know that American point defense systems cannot reliably intercept Iranian anti-ship missiles in massive saturation attack scenarios. To understand how the United States lost the moral and political narrative leading up to this military collapse, we must examine the events of June 2025 and the recent bombardment of Iran. On June 13, 2025, Israel launched Operation Rising Lion, deploying over 200 fighter jets to strike more than 100 Iranian facilities. Iran responded with Operation True Promise 3, launching 550 ballistic missiles and 1,000 drones at Israel. While 90% were intercepted, 31 missiles hit Haifa, killing 28 Israelis and displacing 9,000. In Iran, 9 million people fled major cities in terror. The United States directly entered the war on June 22nd, dropping bunker-buster bombs on Natanz, Fordow, and Isfahan, severely damaging Iran's nuclear enrichment capability. Yet, the Islamic Republic of Iran survived. Iran flipped the narrative, terminating all cooperation with the International Atomic Energy Agency, emerging from the conflict with less international nuclear oversight than before. The propaganda machine aggressively pushed the narrative that Iran was running out of missiles because it launched fewer projectiles in subsequent waves. This interpretation fundamentally misreads Iran's asymmetric exhaustion trap. Iran launched fewer missiles because it no longer needed to launch as many. Israel's interceptor stockpiles were deeply degraded. By keeping interception rates high for the defense, Iran shifted the economic burden onto Washington. Every interceptor fired is a massive dollar amount that the United States must spend and manufacture, while Iran's costs remain negligible. Iran does not need to win in a single strike. It seeks to make the conflict persistently, economically, and militarily unsustainable for the West. This unsustainable cost became agonizingly clear when Donald Trump issued a legally disastrous ultimatum: open the Strait of Hormuz or face the total destruction of civilian infrastructure. Deliberately threatening civilian infrastructure as a coercive tool is a blatant war crime. As the deadline expired, confirmed strikes heavily targeted petrochemical facilities, civilian bridges, residential areas, and at least 30 Iranian universities, including the prestigious Sharif University of Technology. Under international humanitarian law, bombing a university full of students or destroying hospitals constitutes a campaign of terror against a civilian population. When American and Israeli forces execute deliberate war crimes, they instantaneously forfeit all diplomatic leverage across the global South. The geopolitical ramifications of this American military and moral paralysis are absolute. Veteran geopolitical expert Professor John Mearsheimer unequivocally concludes that Iran is winning the war and President Trump is cornered in a catastrophic lose-lose situation. The United States has absolutely no option for winning the conflict. Escalating with a massive ground invasion into Iranian territory would only guarantee a devastating defeat. If the United States continues the war, the global economy will inevitably fall off a cliff into a worldwide depression. If Trump attempts to secure an exit ramp by making major diplomatic concessions to Iran, his political career will be utterly destroyed. The primary beneficiaries of this American blunder are the strategic architects in Moscow and Beijing. The profound global energy shortage precipitated by Iran's blockade forced the United States to quietly and humiliatingly lift economic sanctions on Russian oil to prevent a total collapse of the global market. Simultaneously, the insatiable demand for interceptors and munitions in the Middle East has drastically decelerated the flow of American military aid to Ukraine, directly handing Russia immense operational superiority. Concurrently, the United States has violently abandoned its strategic containment policy toward China, pivoting away from Asia by taking critically important military forces out of Japan and South Korea and sinking them into the Middle East. China's influence in the greater Middle East is expanding exponentially as Beijing presents itself as a responsible global stakeholder, while the United States proves it cannot be counted on to behave intelligently. To definitively break the American petrodollar, Iran passed legislation in March 2026 establishing a formal toll booth system for the Strait of Hormuz, charging over $1 million per vessel. Crucially, priority access is granted to Chinese ships, and all fees are collected exclusively in Chinese yuan or untraceable cryptocurrency, entirely bypassing the Western banking infrastructure and the SWIFT system. In a desperate retaliation, the United States Navy enacted an all-or-none blockade on April 13, 2026, deploying over 50,000 troops, B-52 Stratofortresses, B-1 Lancer bombers, and A-10 Thunderbolt aircraft. Despite this massive buildup, over 230 loaded oil tankers remain trapped inside the Gulf. Now, a massive Chinese oil tanker, flying the flag of the People's Republic, is steaming directly toward the American blockade line. If the U.S. Navy physically stops and boards the Chinese vessel, Beijing will categorize it as a direct act of aggression against Chinese sovereignty, legally triggering a military escalation that could ignite World War III. If the United States yields and allows the Chinese vessel free passage, the blockade is immediately exposed as politically negotiated, and American global resolve is proven completely hollow to every watching nation from Riyadh to Taipei. An objective, forensic analysis of the current geopolitical and military landscape yields a definitive, inescapable conclusion. The foundational architecture of American unipolarity has suffered a critical, irrecoverable, systemic failure. The Middle East conflict was not lost due to a sudden lack of technological sophistication, political bravado, or sheer military funding. It was decisively lost to the ruthless mathematics of asymmetric warfare, absolute geographic constraints, and catastrophic macroeconomic vulnerability. The United States Navy is geographically locked out of the primary operational theater. The Israeli integrated air defense grid has been algorithmically saturated and depleted, and the global economic reliance on the American petrodollar is being systematically erased by the strategic maneuvers of a rising multipolar coalition. The strategic calculus clearly dictates that regardless of whether the Trump administration attempts a disastrous military escalation or pursues a humiliating diplomatic capitulation, the overarching geopolitical objectives of the Iranian axis, alongside the broader global ambitions of China and Russia, have already been fundamentally advanced. The ironclad deterrence mechanism that strictly dictated global stability for over 75 years has been violently shattered, not by a conventional superpower clash, but by an intelligently engineered multi-front exhaustion trap. The post-war paradigm will inevitably feature a severely wounded United States, a dramatically diminished Israel, and a global order increasingly dictated by the strategic priorities of Beijing and Moscow. The transition is mathematically complete, and the rules of international power projection have been permanently rewritten.